Good evening and welcome to Harris Hall for the 2024 ASG Presidential Debate. Beginning Thursday, you can vote in the ASG Presidential Election. And tonight, you'll hear directly from the two teams vying for your vote. Thank you for joining us. I'm Max Rothfeder.
And I'm Gabrielle Khoriaty. We are both members of the Northwestern News Network and will be your moderators. The Daily Northwestern had planned on being our media partner tonight. However, a number of student organizations are boycotting the Daily. It comes after action taken by the Daily's parent company, the Students Publishing Company. Two NU students are facing criminal charges for allegedly distributing fake copies of the Daily. Those copies contain the headline alleging Northwestern is complicit in the genocide of Palestinians. The SPC filed a complaint over those fake copies. Now students are calling for a boycott of the Daily until the criminal charges are dropped. That power lies in the state's attorney's office.
At least one of the candidates told the Daily they would not participate in a co-moderated debate. The Daily decided to remove themselves because this issue will not be solved tonight. In a statement to NNN, the Daily Northwestern saying, quote, over the last few days, various individuals and student organizations have pledged not to speak to the Daily due to the ongoing criminal charges against two students connected with distributed imitated copies of the student newspaper. Because of this, the Daily has decided to pull out of moderating this year's ASG presidential debate and defer to the qualified moderators from the Northwestern News Network. The Daily looks forward to a fair and balanced election. NNN considers the debate an important opportunity to hear directly from the candidates for this year's ASG presidential election. For that reason, we're going to move forward. We will continue to follow the situation with the Daily's parent company as it unfolds. But for tonight, let's focus on hearing from our candidates.
Please welcome co-presidential candidates Taishea Woods, Weinberg Sophomore and ASG Co-Executive Officer of Justice and Inclusion, and Caleb Snead, Weinberg Sophomore and ASG Chair of Finance. Let's also welcome presidential candidate Nicole Medina. She's a Weinberg Jr. and Alianza Senator, and Anna Alava, a SESP Jr. and Senator for Northwestern's Asian and Pacific American Coalition.
Both sets of candidates have agreed each side will have 75 seconds uninterrupted to answer each question. They will also have up to 30 seconds to respond if we ask a follow-up question or if the other team mentions them by name specifically.
We've got a lot to get to tonight, so let's jump right in. Each team will have 2 minutes for their opening statements. Let's start with Taishea Woods and Caleb Snead. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So we really want to convey that under our leadership, ideas become conversations, conversations become initiatives, and initiatives become innovation. And at the foundation of all of this is experience. Caleb and I have served on ASG for the past 2 years. We've served as senators, we've served as committee members, we've served as committee chairs, executive board members, and cabinet members. And through all of these experiences, we've really learned the ins and outs and the intricacies of how ASG works. More importantly, we've gained insurmountable and invaluable experience as students on this campus. We both hold BIPOC and FIGLY status, which has given us key insight into the procedures and policies that comes with existing on this campus as a student. And we've also gained external leadership positions in other orgs that aren't ASG. For example, I founded my own organization this year, and Caleb has served on the executive board of Quest Plus. And through these experiences, we understand things like, what is it like to start up a SOFO account, or what is it like to book a room for a student org? So we really have the ins and outs of not only ASG, but also what it is to be a day-to-day student on this campus. And we believe that the synthesis of these two types of experiences and perspectives really make us the most prepared to lead you all in ASG's next chapter.
Yeah, and another thing we want to emphasize is that our platform is the manifestation of needs that we've heard on campus. At the foundation of our platform is inclusion. Inclusion is critical to forming a sense of belonging on campus. So that means hosting events like the Culture Summit we did in the fall, and modernizing SOFO, which has become a significant barrier to student organizations' ability to host events and organize. As ASG co-presidents, our door is always open, which we have learned is critical to impactful leadership.
Thank you, Taishea and Caleb. Anna and Nicole.
Hi, my name is Nicole Medina. I am a junior, as we've already established, and I study political science and Latino studies. And this is my VP, Anna.
Hi, I'm Anna. I'm a third year as well, studying social policy, data science, and Asian American studies. Currently, I serve in ASG as the deputy chair of Justice and Inclusion, while Nicole is representing Alianza in Senate. I also represent the Asian Pacific American Coalition in Senate, but we also hold a variety of positions in other organizations, particularly as treasurers or on the executive boards. And it's from these experiences of being both in and outside of ASG that we've noticed the increasing disparity between ASG desires and student group desires and the lack of equity-centered communications. It's from these experiences in our own organizations as well as from various other treasurers, other groups that we're running to make equity-centered communication a forefront of ASG, in addition to establishing more community and campus life building and just greater communication between ASG and students overall.
And we do want to stress that it's significant to consider the idea of being involved with student groups to the, capacity that we've definitely engaged with ours, and the relationship that we can forge through ASG. And by merging those two together, hopefully we can see a more unified student government on this campus. And I personally plan to use my identity as a first-generation, low-income Central American woman on campus to definitely bolster the support of these communities and work in tandem with everybody else that's on campus that still needs support.
Thank you so much for your opening statements. For our first question tonight, we're going to start with Caleb and Taishea. So what is the top policy issue that you have, the first thing that you want to accomplish if you are elected to office?
I think it's really continuing the projects we already have going. So that means meeting with SHIELD to secure funding in the same way that we did last year, the additional $611,000 that brought our total funding allocation to nearly $2.5 million, which was important for securing the operations of events that are incredibly important and impactful for students on campus.
Additionally, I think it's more of a question of what are the top policies, plural, because we have a lot of projects that we're currently working on, but what we really want to emphasize is collaborative leadership. So we've done a lot of working with current ASG exec members and current committee chairs to make sure that we're working on everything that is important to the students to ensure that as we move forward as an organization, we're moving in multiple arenas at once. So meeting with admin, making sure we're understanding what different groups need, and ensuring that we're really making sure that we're properly addressing all of the needs that students are expressing to us.
We both agreed that in discussion of what is the top priority, we came to the consensus that the best way to address that would be to focus on equitable policies in general. And so I will say, Anna and I met through the departmentalization of ethnic studies, of Latino studies and Asian American studies. Based on that, we were trying to get it into a department status with access to get more faculty, because currently Latino Studies only has 2 faculty that are on that board in order to fund that program and produce things for that program with the students on campus. And so we're definitely looking in a way to bolster those types of programs to be departments that have the financial structure and the financial autonomy that other programs have. And at least through ASG, we hope to both bring in money, but then also make ASG more than just financial procedures that engage with the student body.
We'd also add, though, that considering that financial procedures with the student groups is one of the main components of ASG, we also want to heavily prioritize revising the current procedures to ensure more equity and communication with student groups in the process. Last year, with the process changing, it was rushed in a sense that some students had only 1 week to know that they had to appeal their funding. During their exam weeks, were unable to show up to appeal their funding, and then their groups are not able to advocate for increased funding, and thus resulting in reduced programming this year. So on that note, we want to ensure that there's greater communication with student groups, that treasurers are involved in every step of the process, and that we're not reducing funding for some groups. Like Alianza's budget was cut literally in half due to the not inequitable communication between ASG and student groups.
Thank you to both teams for your responses. I know you touched on financing a little bit, and that brings us to our next question, which will go to Nicole and Anna first. Many students on campus interact with ASG primarily through funding of student organizations and activities. How would you like to see ASG allocate its money, and how will you ensure transparency in the funding process and allocation?
I think last year, Nicole and I were both on the board of financial review. Nicole chaired this committee. And so our role was to oversee the financial allocation process, make it accountable, et cetera, except the reality of the past year due to the rush process was that whatever input we had was not necessarily taken seriously in the final allocations. And so going forward, we want to expand this board, expand the timeline of which this is established, so that there is actual time for our input to be integrated throughout. In addition, incorporating more treasurer and student voice input throughout the whole year, not just in the lead up to the funding application process. We believe that there should be a greater open channel of communication between student groups and treasurer or SAFC overall in ASG in order to ensure more funding, not just for affinity groups, but also for groups that serve to represent any student's interests or pre-professional goals.
And then in the idea of how do you have this transparent communication, our main stressor is to meet with groups. We plan to talk to groups in order to hear what their idea of equitable distribution and what that means to them so that we can consider that as we move forward.
Thank you both. Now, Caleb and Taisha, what is your response?
I think there were some definitely good points made. We are looking at revamping the process. We have county executives that are going to meet with student orgs to make sure that they are aware of all the things that are expected of them during the process, and also making sure that we are advocating upfront and earlier in the year for additional funding. Last year there was a 30% shortfall in what we were able to allocate for groups. So there had to be some sort of difference in what we could actually do. And that is why we went to administration and asked for additional funding. So doing that ahead of time allows us to make better decisions and secure the funding of groups that were negatively impacted by this process.
Yeah, and this is actually something that we're already working on in our current roles and current capacities. So for example, later this month, we have a meeting with SHIL where we will be trying to do that same process again to ensure that all students have access to the funding that they need. We've also been meeting with student groups about this. And for example, Caleb's committee produces a financial report each and every year that is sent out by email. And we're looking into ways to really amplify and augment that communication process. So maybe like social media and more palatable infographics, because we recognize that not every student has time to sit down and read a 10-page report, but you can interact with an Instagram post. So we're already working on making those things more transparent and more palatable for students.
So just in that answer right there, you talked a little bit about how you've worked with ASG in the past. What is one item that you've previously accomplished that you're most proud of? And how are you going to be able to leverage this experience in the past in order to serve the student body? And we'll start again with you, Caleb and Taisha.
Yeah, I definitely think it's that additional $611,000 of funding that we can't express enough how impactful it was. It really decreased the shortfall we had in our budget allocations and allowed us to redistribute a significant portion amount of funding, $228,000, to affinity groups and groups that had an 11 and 12 priority ranking during the application process. It's something that we definitely will continue to work on. And what was most impactful in being able to get that funding was our relationship with administration. We've worked over the past year to develop a relationship with administration, and it has been critical to being able to get in the spaces where decisions are made and advocate for needs.
And then Nicole and Anna, same question to you.
Something that Nicole and I worked on, which Nicole already mentioned, was the resolution to departmentalize ethnic studies programs. But beyond that specific topic, that experience gave us a lot of practice interfacing with administration, faculty, department heads, student groups, and students in general. And we've taken that experience not only on that subject, but other areas. For example, reestablishing the inclusion NU funding from ASG in the Multicultural Center. So we have experience talking with people who are at all levels of administration, and so we'll be able to pull from those relationships to build projects, whether it's in campus life or ethnic studies or whatever it may be.
And in the conversation about what you're most proud of, we definitely bring this in because we had, I guess, the opportunity to work with all students. We had the opportunity to work with Northwestern faculty, and we had the opportunity to interact with a lot of administration, I guess, different types of heads that essentially explained this complex process that is admin and is changing rules. And through there, we're trying to interact to still make this happen because it is not common knowledge that they're not yet departments. And so with that being said, it's about raising awareness about these issues and essentially streamlining a voice for all communities.
Thank you both teams for your responses again. For this next question, it is going to be slightly different for each teams. As I'm sure you've noted, there is one state that's running as co-presidents while another team that is running as a president and vice presidential candidate. So we'll start with Nicole and Anna. Nicole and Anna, could you tell me and explain to me why you decided to run as presidential and vice presidential candidates?
Nicole approached me about running, and she initially had said co-presidents, in the sense that we both deeply care about our communities, deeply care about the work and the potential that ASG has to offer. But considering the realities of being a student and different time commitments, different work commitments, and able to afford a lifestyle in Evanston, Nicole has more ability to spend time in ASG that I would not feel as comfortable committing to. So although I am certain of the time commitment I could offer, within that reality checking of jobs to fulfill, I would be vice president and she would be president.
And then to just go a little bit on that, yes, initially the idea was to be co-presidents, but understanding the time commitments that come with that type of responsibility, we both decided that this would essentially make that we finish the policies and that one of us is held reliable and accountable for the majority of time, and that would be me. And I will be happy to fulfill that time commitment.
Thank you both. And now, Caleb and Taishea, why did you opt to run as co-presidents, and how do you think that this will be effective in your role?
I think that in the way that, number one, we run like as coworkers in ASG, but also as friends, we really have collaboration and communication at the core of everything that we do. So in the projects that we've already accomplished through ASG, we've been doing it together. We meet, we talk about strategy, we talk about our opinions, we talk about our emotions. Really every single thing that we put into this work has been about collaboration and about making sure that we as a unit are making sure that we're on the same page and doing the best that we can and thinking through things in a multiplicity of perspectives. And furthermore, I really think that the co-presidency is really good for us because, like I said, we think in two different ways. We have different perspectives, different friend groups, and the balance of these two coming together really is how we can best serve the Northwestern community because we balance each other out so well, and it's the best way for us to contribute.
Yeah, and it's really indicative of, like Taishea was saying, our relationship, but also our ability to think forward. One thing we really want to stress is that innovation requires structural change, and it really is a saying that our ability to accomplish things comes from the context in which we surround ourselves, and that comes from a top-down structural change.
Thank you so much for those answers. Now, you've talked about the administration a little bit in your answer so far, and that's one of the key responsibilities of the ASG president, to be the chief student ambassador to the Northwestern administration. So how will you work to ensure that the needs and interests of the student population are conveyed to the administration? And we'll start again with you, Caleb and Taishea.
I'd say that ASG's role is more so to be the chief amplifier of student voice to administrators. So one of our key, strategies is to get students in the room with admin. We've met with Corbin, director of Norris, we've met with Sho, we've met with Susan. And while a key part of ASG's work is advocacy, one of the best ways that we do that, again, is through amplification. So how can we get student groups who need more money or who need space in a room with Sho so that they can have these conversations and directly express their needs? We want to make sure that students are active agents in their experience at Northwestern, and the best way to do that is to make those relationships, leverage what we have, leverage who we know, and get y'all in the room with the people who are making the decisions.
Yeah, in between these meetings, it's really making sure we have focus groups and surveys to understand what the student experience is really like, and make sure we have data to support a lot of the decisions and the initiatives that we create to advocate for students' needs.
And then Nicole and Anna, same question to y'all.
Yeah, first and foremost, I do think it's significant to address the structure of Senate. You have your exec and you have your Senate bodies, which work together, but they work differently. And so ideally, you would want to incorporate the Senate to a way that does bolster the 20 student groups that are part of that Senate and the students that represent the 6 schools of Northwestern. Ideally, if we restructure Senate to a way that everyone will have a voice in a way that is amplified, as Taishea mentioned, then I think that would be one of the best ways to incorporate and to be held accountable to the student body. And it very much is about bringing all the voices in the room. It's about doing that due diligence and meeting with the groups that you intend to meet with to fulfill all needs.
I think it's also important to note that with the current structure, as a treasurer personally, when I've tried reaching out to certain administration, just even in SOFO, to ask about how processes work, how processes are expected to change, we're often told that we shouldn't ask them, but instead we should ask the ASG presidents to ask on our behalf. And that's something that Nicole and I don't believe should be the structure of student voice on campus, and that more students should be incorporated within those meetings, be able to talk to admin without having to go through one sole representative on campus.
So you said you wanted to see structural change. Can you elaborate what that looks like?
I think that part of it looks like incorporating more students into meetings rather than only having closed meetings. Also, in terms of Senate, for example, when a resolution is passed, right now it is not always the case where the presidents or the executive body have to take these issues and bring them to administration, even though the Senate is where students are meant to be represented. So the issues that Senate votes on should be what are directly taken to the executive body and the administration.
And then another idea that we were just brainstorming is seeing how the individual senators that make up the Senate body
I'm sorry, that is time on the response. So for our next question, we'll start with Nicole and Anna, so we'll be right back with you guys. Northwestern student body consists of a diverse range of majors, backgrounds, interests, and beliefs. As the leaders of the student body, how will you represent all Northwestern students and help foster a greater sense of community and belonging?
In the conversation of community and belonging and the diverse identities that Northwestern possesses, it's significant to make spaces for all those identities to exist. With that being said, my freshman year, I was huge on wanting a space for my club on campus, which is Alianza. And in my head, this idea of a Casa Latina was amazing because it would provide a space for all of us to engage with each other. And I still see this being the case. While we were meeting with different student groups, a big issue was people don't feel like they have places to go. And so I talked to one of the directors, and there's an idea right now about Sheridan houses being converted to the offices moving to a different building, which was the Jacob Center. And so with that big project coming into play, you could bolster this diversity and all these identities on campus if it does come into fruition. So we're thinking about working very intentionally with people to make this project happen.
I think also when it comes to diversity of students, when we think about gender as well as academic backgrounds, there's some resources on campus that are severely underfunded. For example, the Care Center is something we would really want to prioritize for survivors on campus.
That is your time, thank you. And now Taishia and Caleb, what is your answer to that same question?
So this is something that we've actually been very intentional about working on currently. So we've been meeting the same space issue that you were just talking about. We've been meeting with a lot of constituents on students because this is a problem that so many student groups are facing. And it's not only our cultural orgs, there are also our performance groups, for example, StuCo, our theater groups, our dance groups, Fusion. So we really want to make sure that as we go about solving these problems that number one have been existed and attempted to have been solved for the past like 10, 15 years, we want to make sure that we're taking a step back and really doing intentional assessment. What is it that these students need, gathering data, what has been tried before, what hasn't been working, and what are the barriers that students are facing, so that the next time that we try to solve this problem, we're being intentional and we're being efficient. So that's something that we really prioritize in these meetings with student groups is coalition building, resource sharing, and intentional assessment of these issues.
And then our last question for this section of the debate. In last year's election, only 175 students, which is just 2% of the Northwestern undergraduate population, actually voted in the ASG election. Now, current co-presidents Donovan Cusack and Molly Whalen were running unopposed, but this was a record low turnout. So why should students vote in this election and care about the work that ASG is doing generally? And then Caleb and Taishia, we'll start with you.
I think one of the first and main reasons that students should vote is because ASG has a lot of impact over the student life. So for example, Caleb in the last funding cycle managed over $2 million of funds that went directly to student groups. This is something that is paramount to how our university functions because so much of our life is centered in student groups. Number two, one of our core campaign pillars is community building and community engagement. And we've recognized through talking with students and through being students ourselves that community is one of the key ways that students show up, grow, and heal on our campus. So how better to build community than to hear from the students? We want to make sure that y'all are involved in processes such as ASG elections so that your voices are actually heard and implemented into every single thing that we do on this campus.
Yeah.
All right, and then Nicole and Anna, same question to y'all.
I think when it comes to why you should vote in ASG elections, it's sad almost when you look at the past trajectory. Like 10 years ago, there used to be 4,000 students who would vote. Last year it was 100-something. The year before it was around 2,000. So we can see that clearly ASG is not being received by students as something that matters in their everyday lives. So the first issue is that we need to make ASG actually matter to the student body. And through that, we have to be more transparent about how we do things. So we recognize, for example, $2 million should not be regulated just by a small committee of people. But further, ASG has to connect to people in the immediate issues they're facing. For example, as Deputy Chair of Justice and Inclusion, I wanted to have ASG make a statement in regards to Palestine on campus, but due to whatever it may have been in the executive board, that opportunity was not fulfilled. And so I think that whoever's in ASG has the opportunity, the platform, and the power to really shine attention on certain issues on campus that our students on our campus are facing that we need to take seriously. And that's why we believe that you should vote in the ASG election, because whoever you vote for has that power, has that voice to represent you and what you need on campus.
Quick follow-up, this one will go to both teams. So both of you have talked about this $2 million that's going to student organizations, right? That's impacting a large amount of the student body. How are you going to you've talked about how important funding is. How are you going to specifically use that fact to get students to care about the election amongst the other ideas that you mentioned?
It's definitely including them within that process. Like Taishia mentioned earlier, we release annual financial reports, and that is critical to understanding and making sure that people understand how, why, and what are the decisions that we make, and so they can take part in that, ask us questions, contribute in any way that's really meaningful.
And then Nicole and Anna.
In the discussion of $2 million and why student groups should care about those $2 million, I'm sure the student groups are already aware of how those $2 million influence them. We have seen how Funding Senate goes when you have these pools of funds that are very limited sometimes and don't have the capacity to reach all the groups. So I don't necessarily think that we need to stress the importance of it. I believe that all the student groups are aware of this and are actually trying to find out how they can have their own autonomy without losing any power to have to adhere to ASG standards.
Well, I want to thank all of the candidates for all of your answers to our questions. We're going to take a quick break, and on the other side, when we come back, the ASG Election Commission will be here to ask some of the questions submitted by the student body. You're watching the 2024 ASG Presidential Debate.
Ready, set, piano. One, two, three, four.
I'm Kelly McEvers, founding host of the NPR podcast Embedded.
I'm James Edwards, host of the Unresolved podcast from Frontline.
I'm Antonia Cereijido, former senior producer of Anything for Selena podcast and current executive producer at LAS Studios.
Welcome back to the 2024 ASG Presidential Debate. I'm Paul Graham, chair of the ASG Election Commission.
And I'm Dylan Jost, ASG's Executive Officer of Democracy. We've solicited questions from the student body and student organizations, so let's get right to it.
Our first question will be, how do you plan to address the institutional harm done in light of the ongoing crises? Taishia and Caleb, you can answer first.
I think the first way that we think about addressing the institutional harm done is again by assessing students and what they need. Like I said earlier, ASG's main priority and main goal is to properly represent the students. So in meeting with students and really understanding what are the pains that they're going through, what do they need to organize, what do they need to meet as a community, and how do they heal is the best way that we as ASG can go about navigating these crises and these issues on campus.
And one method we've taken of doing that so far is ensuring students don't have barriers to organize and form community and heal from these institutional harms that Northwestern and outside things have impacted them.
We've definitely approached a lot of this institutional, moving away from the way that the institution has harmed communities through student group organizations first. So one of our priorities or one of our initiatives is to try to find a way to make those student groups have a bigger impact and voice through ASG which we recognize, the institution recognizes as the power on campus.
Also, some tangible ways that we've been thinking about this is we know that in the past, ASG has had a way to reimburse materials that are used in organizing or protests and things of that nature, but that grant is often not communicated well to people who are in those circles. So finding a better line of communication with people who are involved, as Nicole and I are already looped into those conversations, we believe that that could be a strong way for us to be able to provide resources directly to those who may face concerns about privacy, safety, and things like that.
Thank you. Our next question is, if you were to be elected, what would your first week of the ASG residency look like? Caleb and Taishia, we'll begin with you.
One thing we want to stress is that our first week in ASG, our first week as co-president is going to look the exact same as what it has already. It would be a continuation of the projects we are already working on, a continuation of the relationships that we have already formed with the administration that allow us to really improve and move the initiatives that we already have in place forward.
Yeah, and a continuation of the relationships that we've been developing with student groups. We've met with so many students this week, and we really plan to make ASG a more open door policy, make sure that we're having a key and tangible perspective onto what's going on the ground, so that the things that we're doing, the policies that we're pushing, the conversations that we're having with admin accurately reflects everything that students are going through in a timely and efficient manner.
Thank you. Anna and Nicole?
I think in our first week, we'd also want to continue to meet with students, not just in our ASG roles, but as student leaders and as students. We've already been in conversation with so many organizations because we're all interlinked somehow. Yeah. And so really bringing that relationship forward into our potential roles as president, vice president is very important to us, but also establishing a space for people who are receiving SAFSI funding to communicate more openly with whoever SAFSI chair or AEs. For example, establishing even as simple as a group chat between all the AEs and the treasurers on campus would be a much simpler way instead of having to scramble to find how to contact your AE if they don't check their email regularly or whatever it may be. So definitely improving communication and continuing the relationships we have with student groups on campus.
And that was going to be my point, to just continue doing these critical dialogues with the student groups and with the students in general, even those that aren't a part of student groups.
Thank you. The next question will be, what tangible progress have you made on your initiatives present in your platform? And we'll start with Anna and Nicole.
Well, definitely in our platform, we have 3 core pillars: equity and inclusion, bringing support to campus life, and bringing ASG to students. We have worked tirelessly to try and, motivate the student body to engage with ASG. And through that, we would continue to facilitate that type of relationship. But we've also worked, as we've mentioned, with admin, with students, and with professors to try and make this place at least a little bit more equitable. I think it's hard to say that it will be equitable at the end of the day, because simply change does not work that fast. And this particular institution does not move in ways that we would prefer.
But also, a lot of the parts of our platform are things we've already been working on. We've definitely picked up new pieces as we've heard new student voices and complaints. But for example, things like working on more expansion of safe rides, work from off-campus to off-campus, working on increased funding for Care Center, increased funding for multicultural student affairs. These are all issues that we've already been talking to middle-level admin, working with the staff who already know what's feasible and possible, so that we know when we meet potentially with upper admin, what those who are really doing the work know is possible, and so that we can actually implement these, hopefully during our term.
Thank you.
Caleb and Taishia, would you like to respond?
Yeah. One thing we definitely want to emphasize is the continuing progress we are making on improving our funding methodology. So within the Student Activities Finance Committee, we are collaborating with our peer institutions, Harvard, Yale, Johns Hopkins, U Rochester, the Kofi institutions, to assess what is their funding methodology and how can we adopt some of those practices to really improve the overall allocation process. We are also collaborating with SOFO, the Student Organization Finance Office. They serve as the bank for organizations, and really understand what are the pain points, what are the actual problems, and how do we remedy them, and bringing in outside perspectives, because we are not experts on all issues. So it's important that we build the right team to handle these problems. And so that's talking to administrators, Rob Aaron, Tim Holbrook, to really assess what is the actual problem and come up with tangible steps that we can take.
And then outside of finance, we've done a really big push to, again, foster cross-cultural community on campus. So this fall, we had our first ever cultural summit, which was a huge feat and a huge accomplishment. We used Norris to allow 12 student organizations to come and showcase their culture through food, dance, and really just bring the cultural lens to campus in a celebratory way so that we're not only acknowledging our diverse body in times of crisis, tragedy, and pain. And we've also been developing coalition across student orgs through our Justice and Inclusion Coalition.
Thank you. The next question is, how do you plan to support marginalized groups that are faced with over-policing? Anna and Nicole, will begin with you.
I think in this particular discussion, we've been very adamant about listening to the communities that are most impacted. Through that, we are simply just mechanisms of representation for others. And we are trying our best right now in the discussion of over-policing on campus. It's interesting to see the way that NUPD interacts versus Evanston PD. And we think that these kinds of dialogues are central to Northwestern standards. And we need to do our best to try and disband them. I think that's where we're at.
Thank you. Caleb and Taishia.
I think we also focus on where the conversation has really stagnated. This has been a reoccurring problem for years. And so we focus on what are some things that have already been done, where can we push on, apply pressure, where hasn't been pressure applied, and really, again, take some time to reassess what's the actual problem and why why is this continuing to be a problem?
And we also have a huge emphasis on working in the background, so connecting students to resources, having these meetings, making sure these advocacy groups are meeting with people like Shill and Susan Davis to ensure that they are directly getting the resources that they need, having the conversations that they need, understanding the ins and outs of things like legal procedures, but also Northwestern procedures that may be barriers to things like demonstrations. And really just, again, making sure that as many barriers as possible are torn down so that we can pursue a more just and equitable campus and experience for all students.
Thank you. And finally, our final question will be, what drives your desire to support NU students? And we'll be starting with Taishia and Caleb.
Kind of how we opened, the fact that we really have a deep understanding of what it's like to be a student leader, and just a person on this campus. There's nothing more inspiring to us than, seeing what students are going through and seeing when they're, feeling supported and feeling empowered, but also hearing their frustrations and their outcries. We sit at the intersection of the day-to-day student experience and also the leadership experience, which is something that we feel that we can leverage to greatly impact our communities. And we're really inspired by the prospect and the promise of creating change for students. We believe that we have, the connections, the ins and outs, the information that we need to really push that needle forward. And nothing excites us more than really having the opportunity to work with students, work for students, and transform Northwestern to give everyone a better experience on this campus.
Yeah, another thing that inspires us is the impact we were already able to have in the SAC Spring funding cycle. We significantly reduced barriers that allowed 28% more groups to apply, and I advocated for more funding that really allows student groups to do more across the board.
Thank you. And Anna and Nicole?
I think in the idea of what inspires me or what excites me to be more involved on campus to support marginalized communities is simply where I'm from and my community. I mean, I was born and raised in Chicago. I grew up on the West Side, and coming into an institution like Northwestern, immediately I felt like I didn't belong. The ASG president my freshman year was giving a speech, and I felt scared. I felt like I needed to reach out to resources, but I didn't know where to go. But I knew that ASG was one of the central points that had connections everywhere on campus. So I decided to join ASG my freshman year. I'm a junior now, going to be a senior next year. And it is through these spaces that I want to make sure that people that don't feel supported have a voice and have somewhere to go with someone that is willing to help and go beyond what is standard and what is offered. And yes, we have resources, but sometimes I feel like they are not made accessible to the communities that need them the most. So I will do my best to make sure that those students that feel left out and marginalized feel included and that they belong on this campus.
I think it's also something that motivates me to advocate for students on campus is simply the fact that there's hope that we see on other campuses from knowing other student leaders in DePaul or other Illinois colleges through outside of off-campus involvements in justice spaces and seeing how they organize and knowing that we can do better.
Thank you. We'll have to leave it there. Thanks to both sets of candidates for your answers. When we come back, we'll hear closing remarks from each side. Don't go anywhere.
My relationship with Giannis is unique. We're from the same country, we're from the same city. Being a Northwestern alum, I think, has tremendous advantages in the sports industry. To me, that community, it's been with me for 20 plus years.
Trying to work my way out of the prison system was the most difficult challenge of my life. It only became tangible once I became a Northwestern student.
Welcome back to the 2024 ASG Presidential Debate. To wrap up the evening, each team will have up to 2 minutes for closing remarks.
Now, we'd like each ticket to specifically address why the student body should vote for you over your opponents. Let's start with Caleb and Taishia.
Yeah, so the first thing that we really want to emphasize is putting the agency in your hands. As students, you really have to ask yourself, what leaders do you want and what next chapter of ASG would you like to see? We really want to make sure that you all are thinking through what are the things that you need and who is the best fit to address those needs? Do you need leaders who are showing up at your events and who are meeting with admin and reworking demonstration policies to make sure you know what's going on and to make sure you can organize safely, who are allocating funds, who are putting on events that are making sure that you can show up as fully and as holistically as you can on this campus? We really want to make sure that you are encompassing everything that you need, making sure that your voices can be heard, and making sure that you're selecting the pair of candidates who you believe will best represent and best support you moving forward.
Yeah, we really want to stress our experience in this situation of having relationship with the administration and being in the room where it happens and understanding the ins and outs of the ASG and what it takes to actually accomplish an initiative, our scope and our ability to understand that, and also the outside perspective we bring to understanding the processes, where they work, where they don't work, what needs to improve and why.
And then Nicole and Anna, closing remarks from y'all.
Hola a todos que están aquí. Hello everyone that is watching. I think one of the biggest things for us is just understanding that we are here for the student groups. We are here for the students in general as a campus as a whole. We want to be, I guess, a voice for all. And we hope to meet with everybody in order to make that happen. We hope that through including more student group representation that is truly indicative of the student group experience, and then the Weinberg School of Comms, Medill, all the senators from the 6 schools of Northwestern that come in prepared and ready to engage with us in what the schools need in order to show this equitable forum of communication.
I think as well with that, it's important to realize that when we want leaders who are involved in campus, putting on events, Nicole and I are also in there. We know who our community is. We are in touch with bringing and bridging ASG and our communities and our larger campus community. It's because of the gap we see, that's the reason that we are running. It's because of the leadership style we've seen the past year that we're running. We know what the power that lies in being in the room where it happens, and that's why we want to expand access to that room. Whenever we meet with student groups, we often see a desire for more interaction, but also less of a solely administrative lens, but also an activism and organizing and a collective lens. And that's something that Nicole and I really want to carry forward if we are president and vice president, not just acting in the way that ASG typically does with a singular chain of command, but but integrating as many voices in the process as possible, as we've done in our past work and hope to continue to do next year.
And we hope we've transmitted that message to you all.
For more information, you can see Nicole, Anna.ASG on Instagram.
Thank you to both sides for participating in this year's presidential debate. Now it's up to NU students to decide. You can cast your ballot on Wildcat Connection or by scanning the QR code on your screen from 7 p.m. on Thursday to 7 p.m. on Saturday.
In the meantime, be sure to follow the Northwestern News Network for the latest updates. For Gabrielle, Khoriaty, I'm Max Rothfeder. Have a wonderful evening. Good night.